You are listening to ABL Radio, simplifying productivity for small business owners everywhere. If you are looking for 1% improvements that add up to big results, this is the place for you. Every week, we learn about simple systems and tools that will help you build the business and life you've always wanted. Now here's your host, Zachary Sexton.
Welcome to ABL Business Radio. My name is Zachary Sexton, and today I have with me a DISC personality expert, Mads Singers. Welcome, Mads.
Thank you very much, Zach. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. You're coming all the way from the Philippines, which is it's my morning, your evening, and I'm really excited to talk about this subject. The subject of personalities and personality type testing in general is something I want to explore a little bit more to figure out how that can help small business owners be more effective and be more productive by working towards their strengths. And one of the most popular and the easiest to understand, in my opinion, is the DISC personality test. So how did you get started in becoming an expert in the DISC personality test? So tell us a little bit about your background and what you do with that type of assessment training.
Sure. So I first got acquainted with DISC about 10 years ago. I had just joined IBM. I worked in different outsourcing management roles, and as I joined, I was actually upskilling myself. So I've all my life I've spent a lot of time reading and listening to podcasts and so on. And I came across a podcast that was talking about this thing called DISC, and I got pretty hooked on it. And I was pretty lucky that within a couple of weeks from listening to that podcast, I actually found a live 2-day event about DISC specifically, and I ended up paying out of my own pocket to fly to London to go through a course in DISC, and it was totally eye-opening. I mean, it was from a management standpoint, it was definitely something that I had never considered before, working with people and looking at people in that specific way, and DISC really opened up a way where I could, as a fairly logical person, where I could actually help to understand other people. I think everyone have at some point in their life been in this situation where they look at someone else or someone have done something and they're like, why on earth would anyone on this planet make that decision? It makes no sense, right? And I'm no different from everyone else, but really with DISC, that really became significantly easier. And that was one of the key things that I really learned, and that was one of the key takeaways. And for me, that was definitely one of the things that enabled me to be as effective as I was in the various management roles and getting the most out of the people that worked for me, but also the people that I collaborated with and customers that I was working with, and that was obviously critical for success.
I'm curious, what were you doing for IBM and where were you working at the time?
So at the time, I was just working in Dublin in Ireland, and I was just moving across at the time to Scotland to live in Glasgow. And we basically, IBM worked with companies where we would go in and we would literally scope an organization and help outsource a piece of their staff, right? So very much focused on financial and administration services and customer service and the likes. So IBM would basically go in, that they would usually bid on a certain project or on a certain deal. And if they then won it, they would go in with a team, figure out all the processes and all the whatever happened in the department, and they would then move that to one of their own centers. And that was very often split across the world, right? So depending on language capabilities and so on, it would happen in many different locations. So that was what I was doing with IBM.
All right. So the DISC helped you navigate the corporate career and managing other people and understanding when people seemed less logical. Before we hit record, you were talking about how you didn't quite understand salespeople before getting some DISC training. So maybe we can get into that story in a bit. But first, how would you describe DISC to somebody who's never heard of it before?
Um, most people have heard of some kind of personality test, right? And DISC isn't that much different from the outset, right? So basically, DISC break personalities down into 4 quadrants, and basically every individual have one dominant and one secondary quadrant, and really what it comes down to is what that combination of what strengths does that mean you have, and what weakness does that mean you have. And what I really enjoy about DISC is it goes into a lot more detail, and it's not so superficial. Like some of the tests I've worked with, it's like, oh, you're a good completer finisher, or oh, you're a good, like it put these specific roles on people, rather than saying what is it you're good at, and then you can figure out how that can adapt to different roles, right? So that was one of the things that really attract me with DISC in general.
You can name names. What are some of the ones that you don't enjoy or get as much value out of when it comes to different personality tests out there? Because I am curious about this. I am searching different ones and trying to get some experts on in each of them. So if you have a beef with some, maybe I can bring it to the other person.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have a beef with any of them per se. I think some of the other models might be slightly easier to kick off with, or get started with. So if you have half an hour, some of the other models might be better to give you a short, brief overview. But my feeling with DISC, at least, is that it gives a lot more in depth, and when you really start working with DISC, you get into some details that are incredible, to say the least. And that's I've found it personally a lot more powerful than any of the other tools.
All right. Well, you didn't name any names, but that's all right.
I did not name any.
Don't want to burn any bridges in case
I
you
must
want
be very polite.
to specialize in other ones. All right. That's fair enough. Well, let's get into some of those details. You said there was 4 personality quadrants. Can you talk about briefly just describe each one of them? And DISC is an acronym, DISC, so might as well start with the D and go on from there.
Yeah. So basically the D is the dominant type of role, right? So generally it's the very goal-oriented people, very driven people, the people that are generally willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want, right? And in reality, a lot of people say that, but in reality, most people aren't willing to sacrifice whatever it takes, right? So generally the Ds are the ones that are willing, like work-wise or achieving certain results. These are the ones that are willing to let go of friends, get divorced, literally do whatever it takes, right? They're willing to burn down the team to get the right result, if that's what it takes. They are extremely dominant in most large organizations today, because a lot of large organizations, again, rely on results, right? So the D quadrants is sort of the in a short overview is the very driven, very dominant, sort of very aggressive, direct, and competitive personality. That's the first one. So D stands for dominance. The next one is the I's, and I stands for influence. So these are what people would call the typical salespeople of this world, right? So the I's, they're very enthusiastic, they're very spontaneous, they're very optimistic. They're the people, they love talking, they love really brainstorming ideas, bringing lots of ideas to the table. However, when it comes to execution, they're not that strong. And a bit like salespeople, they're great at selling, but they forget to do the paperwork afterwards, so you actually get the stuff they sold you, right? So that's a very, very typical I trait. The S, and S stand for steadiness. They are generally very loyal, very peaceful, very patient, and they're generally let's call them the mother or the father of a group, right? So it's the kind of people that want everyone to be friends. They're always looking after everyone else before they look after themselves. They're the ones, if you have a group of people, wherever it's in school or in a workplace, they love to be the ones to say, hey, yeah, let's bake cake every Friday and sit down in a circle and have a chat. And so they're very people minded, and they're very, very they're reserved, so they're not necessarily voicing their opinion as loudly, but that they really enjoy talking to people. And then lastly, we have the conscientiousness, which is the C. And they're basically let's call them the developers of this world. So it's the people that are very logical. They love numbers. They love, they love data. They love information. They're the people that they don't mind sitting in a corner of a room, staring into a computer screen or the likes for hours and hours and hours. They can wake up after a weekend and realize they haven't seen another human being, and that's totally okay with them. So that's sort of a brief overview of the 4 personality types.
You mentioned at the top when you were talking about decisive. So we got decisive, influence, steady, conscientiousness are the 3. And there's also different words for them too. I've heard driver or cautious for the C1 because they don't necessarily like as much change. Yep. But you talked about the decisive, the driver, the winner, the one who's just completely, I'm gonna get this goal no matter what, as somebody as something that a lot of people claim that they are, but not very many people actually are. Do you have a percentage of people who are a lead lead personality type for the driver or the influencer or the steady or the conscientiousness? Are there rough numbers on that?
Yeah, generally everything being equal. I mean, the split in a population is generally even, right? So when you look at a population, or when you look at a probably even larger companies, you'll have a fairly equal split of all of them, right? Obviously certain cultures sort of drives more of certain personalities, and if you have a company that's a development company, that will have a lot more C's, for example, but in general there's a wide variety, and it's pretty fluent if you look at personalities sort of worldwide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it makes sense that a company like IBM would have a lot more C's in their department because they're very focused and logical, where a sales company would have a lot more I's. I had heard previously, I had interviewed somebody else on the DISC personality test, and he'd given me some numbers that the D's were only 3% of the population. They were actually extremely rare. And the I's were about 11%, and the steady, the S, was just the vast majority. It was almost 70% of the population. So I will look into that and maybe see if I can't find some actual data behind that, because it was just, he had explained it to me that way.
Yeah. Now, everything else being equal, I mean that's very likely the competition in or the way it's made up in a certain company. But if you look at people overall, no, it's definitely an even split. I mean, if you walk down the street, you grab 100 random people, you'll have a pretty even split.
Okay. So when we're looking at these 4 personality tests, you said there was a dominant and a secondary. Can you talk about how people use that information to be more effective? Let's say that you're primarily a S and you secondary are an I, and I'm just saying that because that's what I am. What should I do? How can I be more effective?
Really, actually, let's take a step back. I mean, what DISC is really about is about communication, right? The fundamentals that you learn with DISC is really different behaviors and different communication style and different way of interacting, right? And really the power with DISC it's actually probably less to understand yourself with regards to communication, but just as much to understand how other people function. Right. So with DISC and with the different personality types, the way you can first of all spot personalities and the way you can see what type of personality people are is in their natural behaviors. So some of those behaviors would, for example, be the volume of voice. Right. So if a person's volume of voice is below or above average, we'll basically tell them if they belong to a DI or if they're an SC. Right. Um, it's things like eye contact, right? Is the person comfortable with constant eye contact, or do they look away within a second after you look at them? It's with regards to their body language. Are they comfortable having their arms wide up in the air and throwing their arms around, or are they very much keeping their arms into themselves, into the close to the body,
Hmm.
right? Are they in terms of how they use their body? Are they walking fast? Are they walking slow? When they talk, do they talk fast? Do they talk slow? Do they talk in bullet points, or do they talk with tons of data? Are they talking about other people? Are they talking about themselves? Are they talking about the specific tasks that have to be done? Really, the power of DISC is really learning to be able to listen for these things so that you can not necessarily 100% mimic, but so that you can get closer to how other people communicate. Because usually when we really struggle to get along with people, when you meet someone and you're like, wow, that person is just horrible, or they're from another planet, or I don't know how to communicate with them, that's usually because they communicate very different from you. And being able to understand how specifically they communicate, being able to see that, and being able to adapt a little bit towards that is really one of the most powerful things with DISC. So I'll utilize you as an example just to give some some brief ideas. So, for example, since you're an SI, one of the things that are very common with you is that you very often use people's names, right? So when you're talking to people, if you say, "Hey, good morning, Peter," you would utilize the name. Whereas people that are opposite from you would just say, "Good morning," right? Naturally, you would smile a lot more, whereas people that are opposite you would not smile very much naturally, right? Now, those are some of the things, that's just a couple of very simple examples where you can actually get a little bit closer to them. So if you're talking with someone who's very high D and very high C, who's having a conversation with you, and you can just see a stone face, right? And you're constantly smiling, they're like, what the hell is he smiling at? Why the hell is he being like that? Why is he using my name all the time? That's ineffective. That's a waste of time, right? So understanding and looking at some of those small behaviors is really, for me, where some of the initial core power of DISC is. And just being able to sort of identify and say, well, how is this person talking, right? Are they talking very fast, giving you specific direction, saying, okay, we're going to do this, let's do it, and move on, right? If that's the case, if that's how they speak, that's also how they prefer being spoken to. They don't like someone coming up to them and say, hello, I just have something I would like to discuss with you because I saw this article. They don't want that, right? They want you to come up and say, I read this article, I think we should do this. Am I okay to go ahead? Right? That's pretty much the way they want to communicate. So being able to actually identify and look at the communication of other people and really move closer to that when possible really helps you both understand them and how they communicate, and therefore understand them better, but it also really, really helps you be more effective with that individual. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So it's what I'm hearing from you is that knowing about these four personality types and basically how people act and interact, it allows you to be more conscious of others' behaviors and essentially mirror what they are doing, how they are acting, because that's the way they best hear. And it kind of reminds me, because
Yeah,
this isn't my personality to tell a story of, hey, if you're around somebody who is just like in this horrible funk, and you just come on like, hey, let's get in a good mood, it's all right, blah blah blah, like that's the worst. They don't want to hear that at all. But if you get on their level and you relate to them and you say, oh man, yeah, that's rough, and you cross your arms, and they'll start actually opening up to you, even though you're being a little bit more closed off. Is that, am I missing the
that
point?
makes sense. No, that makes total sense. I think a lot of people, I mean, it's not necessarily mirror other people exactly, right? But it's moving closer to them. One of the fundamental things about communication is what the listener does, right? And what that means is communication is not what you say, it's what the other person hears, right? Now, if someone talks to you in a very dull, boring voice, if you don't feel there's real emotion behind it, you automatically stop listening, and you automatically become sort of less intrigued talking to the person. Because for you, it's not about what they say. For you, it's just as much the emotion they say it with, and the way they say it, and the way they say it to you specifically. Whereas to them, it might not be about that. It might be about exactly what they're saying, right? So if someone talks to you and they understand to talk a lot more in the way that you like, it means that you actually understand them, and you understand the way they communicate much better, which means they actually get their point across, right? So it's a fundamental shift to understand that it doesn't matter if you're writing an email, or if you're talking on the phone, or you're talking face to face to someone, right? The fundamental is, it's not about what you say or write, it's about what the receiver feels, right? It's about what the receiver thinks when he's listening to your communication. And that's really the fundamental. Because if you're talking to someone, right, that's different than you're still trying to make them understand your point. You're still trying to give them the information that you want to give to them, and that's the whole purpose.
Communication is the main driver, it seems like, of this personality test, that you can know how people work when you're building an organization. So the Able Business Radio is for small business owners looking to make improvements in themselves, in their business, in their lives. And one of the things you need to do is hire people for specific jobs. So it seemed like IBM had maybe more C types, and maybe a sales company might have more DI types. Is this something that you can use to make sure a person is in the right role in the organization, so you hire correctly, or if you hired somebody
Yeah,
and they're not in the right role, maybe shifting their role to match their personality types?
definitely that's very possible as well. So I mean, I mentioned communication first with DISC because I mean, particularly in management, it's one of the core things, right? And that's where DISC utilize a lot of power. But I mean, the DISC, just like the other personality profiles, have a ton of value behind each of those four characteristics, right? That really helps you understand more, both about yourself, but understand how the different personality types, how they think, how they're motivated, how they prioritize, how they feel or don't feel. So there's a ton of information and data behind this, but the communication piece, particularly with managers that I've been coaching lots and lots of, is really essential to yeah. It's probably the biggest win, if you will, from DISC. In regards to the roles and in regards to job, it's absolutely definitely something you can utilize. And I mean I've recruited more than 1,000 people, and it's one of the businesses I run beside the management coaching is a business where I help people outsource and basically help people find people that fit into whatever role. And this is one of the absolute core tools that I utilize. And really for me, um, yeah, getting the right person in the right place is very, very important, right? So one of the great example is the high eyes, the influencers are very, very often really good at talking for themselves, right? And eyes generally do extremely well in interviews because they are great at talking about themselves. And I mean, every time they've done something, they'll happily add 500% to make it sound a lot bigger, right? Which in most interviews sounds great, and a lot of people end up hiring people that sound great in an interview, but doesn't necessarily deliver, right? So that doesn't mean eyes can't deliver, but it's just an example of a certain type of person that often get themselves into the wrong roles because they have the ability to really sell themselves.
You're kind of pooping on eyes right now. Tell some good things about eyes. I'm
Yeah,
feeling down
I
on
mean,
myself.
eyes win the number one game in business, which is networking. So the eyes are really, really strong when it comes to getting to know people, right? I mean, whenever I need stuff done, I can go to an eye, not because they're gonna do it, but because they will know someone, right? So eyes are, I mean, both in management and in business, the eyes are extremely beneficial, and they can be extremely successful if they understand how to utilize their strength. Because as you know by now, success in business is about, it's not about what you can do by yourself, right? It's about the people you know, it's about the network you have, and that's where eyes can really, really yeah, excel at a level that no one else can.
This is good. I think maybe we can end the interview sort of on this note, because that's very actionable for me. So I know I'm a stronger I, so I should focus on building my network, building a strong connection with people. I think it was episode 2 of Able Business Radio. I had a buddy of mine, Stephen Worley, on that talks about building your community and serving your community. I've been trying to think of how I'm growing my business in that terms of I've got people who are potential buyers. Those are people in my community, and I'm trying to serve them through the podcast and newsletters and blogs. I've got people who are my peers. So these are the people in my mastermind group that I bounce ideas off of and I get guidance from. And then I get grow my community from a standpoint of mentors. So people who are 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 steps ahead of me that I could learn from and model after. So that is a good way for me to grow as an individual and hopefully as a company. What about the remaining 3? So let's say you're an S. Can you re-describe what an S is, and then how they can get the what they should be focusing on for themselves to improve?
Yeah, so let me just give another quick point about the eyes. So that was the strength of the eye. The lesser,
We've
the
talked
least
about
beneficial.
these. I don't get things done. All right.
No, but the key thing for you is knowing and understanding that, when you're doing a podcast like we are today, what you know is you're good at doing the podcast, but actually doing the editing and all that other stuff you don't want to be doing, right? So that's the sort of stuff you really want to give away to other people, because your strength is sitting talking with people, getting to know the right people, but it's not necessarily being in the machine room and executing, and getting all the details, the fine prints done, right? So the opposite of that is really making sure that you have people that can help you take care of all the details, because that's the sort of stuff that could buckle you down.
Correct. I'm actually looking
Makes
for
sense?
an assistant now just to help with the detail stuff, and I've got somebody else, my fiance, actually doing the editing of the podcast because I do have such a hard time sitting down and paying attention to certain repetitive tasks. So I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it.
Yep.
So thank you for giving me the good as well as the bad. What about the other folks, the drivers,
Right. So so if we take the D strength is definitely their competitiveness, right? I mean, the fact that they are willing and they can really achieve things. I mean, when you look at any of the big business leaders today, any of at least the top one, I mean, people like Elon Musk and so on, right? They have a lot of D because they are really willing to make significantly sacrifices to really get what they want, right? And they need to just push themselves, right? Because even though people can tell them, oh, you can't do that and so on, they generally have the willpower and drive to push through it, right? So for them, it's really just about pushing through that. The core challenge they have is making sure that they don't sacrifice the people they need, right? So if they're managing a team or if they're managing a company, they obviously need to push towards their goals, but they need to make sure that they don't burn out all their staff, and they need to really make sure that they actually communicate with the people that work with them, right? Because it's not just to do what I say, let's go, right? Sometimes to get buy-in from other people, it's not just telling them what to do. Sometimes you also need to utilize some sales skills and convince them that that's a great idea, and if you want people to work double time, you have to spend a little bit of time convincing them, not just tell them to do it, right? So that's sort of the core strength and weakness for the Ds. In regard to the S's, again, a little bit similar to the I's, they also have a great benefit because people tend to love them, right? The S's never wrong anyone, so they don't make anyone upset at them and so on. They're always very friendly, and they never want to never want to say a bad word about anyone, right? That the opposite, their weakness, if you will, is what the D have, right? So it's often doing things for their own achievement. They're great at helping other people, but sometimes the S's can be so good at helping other people even when they can't even help themselves, and that often puts themselves in a little bit weaker situation, right? Obviously, from a personality skill, that's a great thing, and again, it brings in lots of favors, and there's always lots of people willing to help the S, right? Because they have always helped everyone else. But the weakness for the S is definitely the very often the lack of ability to really push through. And I mean, sometimes to reach goals, right, you have to push someone away. You have to say, listen, I know everyone else thinks I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing it, right? So that's sort of, yeah, the strength and weakness of the S. For the C's, it's, I mean, again, the strength and the weakness is
the S should focus on the being part of a great team. Is that right? Okay.
That exactly. So their focus is similar to the I, but I mean they don't necessarily know as many, but people love them, right? So the point is they can, without being like, the D is very dominant and telling people what to do. The thing is, people always want to do things for the S, and there's often a lot of people around the S's. So if they learn to ask for favors sometimes, it can be difficult for them, but if they learn to ask for favors, they can really get a lot done, right? Because they also know a lot of people, and people really love doing stuff for them.
Ooh, good one. All right, because I feel like a lot of people might be in this camp, especially if you're I don't know. It just seems to me that this is the biggest camp. So asking for more favors generally, as long as you know you're not one of those driver people, is probably a good piece of advice. With especially with that personality type.
The thing is, for any S, it doesn't feel good to ask for help, right? I mean, the S's would rather say, "Oh yeah, I'm okay," and then go home and cry under the cover. But but people want to help them because they help everyone else, right? So even though as an S, it might not feel like comfortable asking for help, people would love to help you. That's the key thing.
Perfect. What about with the conscientious people, the C people?
Yeah. So for the Cs, the strength is the ability to comprehend large amount of data. And really what the Cs love is just information, data, numbers. I mean, spreadsheets. The hottest thing in the world of a C is a huge spreadsheet full of numbers, right? Now, the thing is, that's both a strength and a weakness, because it's a strength in the sense that they can comprehend a lot of data and they can make, let's call it, correct decisions according to their estimates, right? So they're really good at, for very important decisions, for example, they're great at giving them responsibility at looking through a whole lot of data and saying, what's the right thing to do here, right? A lot of CFOs, for example, would often have a lot of C because they really need to know their numbers, right? They really need to be on top of their numbers to be an effective CFO. Now, the weakness with that is very often knowing everything and really always wanting to crunch data first often makes you very slow in executing. So if you always wanna be 110% sure that what you're about to do is the right thing, there will be a million people that have already gone and done it before you get to it, right? So the weakness and the for the C's is generally in execution, right? So it's generally getting to do things, and likewise opposite. They are very opposite with I's and S's, so they are also not particularly great with people, right? So the C's generally lack the people skill, and they are often, if you discuss with a C, if you end up arguing with a C, it's much more important for them to be right than to be effective. And in life, that doesn't really work, right? In life, it's at least that's the lessons I've learned, is it's much more important to be effective than to be right. And that's some of the key challenges with disease. But again, if like with processes and doing, as you said, repetitive stuff, the C's are amazing because they love following procedures. They love doing the right thing. So they really enjoy being able to execute the same task again and again and again, and always sort of optimizing and make sure they get it 100% right. That's what the C's really love doing, right? And that's why C's are natural great coders, right? I mean, if you're sitting coding for 2 weeks straight and you have X amount of big mistakes in the code, that's not going to work, right? So the C's are generally the biggest majority of coders because they really did and test it, they double check, and they make sure everything's correct, right? So, and a similar accountants and so on would generally also be very, very, very high C's.
If you had to give a piece of advice to a C to be more effective, what would you tell them?
Number one would generally learn to communicate better, or learn DISC, which is the same.
One of the two.
Because I mean, C's can be really great because they are good at making the right decisions and so on, but very often they get overlooked because they don't take action. And if they can learn to communicate their findings and their knowledge in a better way, they can be a lot more respected by other people, and they can get further.
Well, Mads, thank you so much. I have such a much deeper understanding of these 4 personality types, what to look for in people if I'm just interacting with them, what to look for in myself, how to better communicate. If people want to dig a little deeper, is there any sort of tool or resource or book or anything that you would send them to? And then we'll part ways. We'll figure out how people can find out more about you and what you get up to.
Sure. I'm actually launching a website with a training course, and that's being launched by April 24th. So I might be after the show go live, and that's called character compass.com. And that's really, I've put the training into a format that fits most people. So different video formats with sort of smaller videos basically covering this entire thing and really giving people a deeper understanding, right? So as I said, usually when I do these training for larger groups, it would usually be between 4 to 8 hours. So there is probably a little bit more than we can cover in half an hour, but definitely Character Compass will help people get a much deeper understanding and become a lot more effective.
Be sure to put that in the show notes. And anything on social media or any other websites that people can reach yet?
I mean, generally, I think from the challenge with disc, I guess, is it's always about getting started, right? So there's a ton of disc tests out there. So, you can go out and Google as well for a disc test if that's it, and you can get a test that'll actually give you, based on the number of questions, you basically get to know a lot about yourself, and that's a great starting point as well for disc.
I want people to connect with you, Mads. Is there a social media or any other place where you hang out where people can thank you for coming on?
Definitely. I use LinkedIn and I use email a lot. I am on Facebook regularly, but I try and keep things away from there. So on LinkedIn, Mads Singers, and my email is mats@matssingers.com. So if you could add that to the show notes as well, that would be great.
Will do. All right. Thank you so much, and we'll connect soon. I actually want to hear more about your outsourcing service because that is an area I'm moving towards. So thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Able Business Radio. Zach wants to help more small business owners like you make 1% improvements that add up to big results. Was this show helpful? Pay it forward. Subscribing and writing a review in iTunes is one of the best ways to help more people find out about the show. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you here next Wednesday, where we will continue to share 1% improvements that will help you become a more useful, less stressed business owner.